Hello and welcome once again to Crazy Comics and Stories. It's me, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard. And at the other end of the series of tubes and wires that we call the internets is Joe, Crazy Writer. How you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing okay. As Cory and I talked about before we started, my blood sugars are up a little bit, so I may not be leaving you to do my hernia surgery. So I will have to call my doctor soon to find out about that. So you may be stuck with me. You didn't think it'd be that easy, did you?
It also means that you're not going for that 450-pound squat anytime soon.
Nope. Although I did do a bunch of shit around the house, but we'll talk about that when we get farther on to freaking and geeking. Now we had
this is your second hernia surgery.
Yeah, the first one happened while I had my store, and I just remember I went into one of the Greenberg shows, and my left leg was just in pain, and I thought, oh my God, I must have ruptured something because it just hurt. So the guys helped me get the boxes in, get everything back to the shop. I went into the doctor, and he kind of felt my right side, then he felt my left side, and he got really deep in there. I mean, if there's a way to get your hands under the pelvic bone and into the hip, into the muscles, he figured it was probably bursitis, irritating the muscles. But you got a hernia over here on your right side. Feel that little bump? Yeah. Does it hurt? No. Yeah, that's a hernia. The other side, I don't know for sure. It's bursitis. I'll give you some anti-inflammatories for it. So I went in and I got that done. It was a day surgery. I remember kind of drifting in and out of sleep. And of course, you're buck naked. And I'm like, I'm awake, I'm asleep.
Buck naked?
Buck naked.
That was going to be my name when I was a porn star. Buck naked, Texas Ranger.
I do remember going to, because you get out of it and you're real high and everything. And I said, we got to go see Mike. And Mike was like, I didn't expect to see you. And then while I was in the shop, the drugs wore off because Mike even told the story. I just kind of slipped out. Yeah, I better go home. I just remember laying on the bed going, this hurts. What does it got to do? Wait a minute. I got drugs. And I took one of the super painkillers. And again, this was late 90s, so I don't think the opium crisis was that crazy yet. And after that, I didn't really take another one. I just, every 4 hours, get up, did a walk around the dining room table, and I recovered. This one, again, doc's like, yeah, day surgery, get you in and out, no problem. The diabetic numbers, like I said, is a concern because the higher the number, the worse off your body heals. I had the same problem with my hip. It's just one of those things. Yeah, you monitor your blood, you take your meds, you watch what you eat. But your body compensates and changes. So I will find out probably next week if it's thumbs up or thumbs down. I'll talk to like I said, I'll probably have to call the doc tomorrow or just wait. And of course, it'll affect work because I was so looking forward to having a month off. Not that I need a month off, but they won't let you back until they know you can lift 40 pounds.
Having a month off is a glorious thing.
Well, it would be unpaid for me.
I keep yelling at my eyes to, hey, have some more cataracts so I can get 2 months off.
Yeah, it's pretty sad when you're looking forward to surgery to just have time off. So
that's America, baby.
It's America. So again, may not happen. I know Cory and I, we talk off screen. We were thinking that will be when the Free Comic Book Day episode airs because it would be probably the day after my surgery. And I just recall I did not want to sit up. I just laid in bed. Now I can lay in bed and watch TV. But so to be continued. I'll have to. We shall revisit it at a future date.
For those of you who are looking for a happy-go-lucky, fun romp in the comic world, we're not going to be doing that this week because there have been 3 deaths that have affected either comics or ourselves or both. And we want to pay tribute to the people who have passed And I also want to do something that we do whenever we talk about somebody passing, and that is remind you, if you are a collector of any kind, leave instructions for your loved ones on how to get rid of your collection, whether it's in a will, whether you've given them instructions written. Make sure they're written, because if you just tell somebody, you may not pass for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they're not going to remember. But I cannot tell you how many people I know who were children of collectors or spouses of collectors or parents of collectors, and that person passed away and they don't know what to do with all the stuff. There is, at my comic shop, a way you can set up a information for how to sell your comics, but it's any collection. If it has any worth at all, you have to think that your relatives or whoever's going to be dealing with you after you're gone is not going to have your information. So take some time now. I know it's a morbid thing. I know it's a depressing thing. When I did this with my son, he said, I don't want to think about you dying. I said, I don't either, but it could happen at any time. And you need to know what's going to be best for you. It's not about me. It's not about my collection. It's not about any of that. I won't be here. But he's going to have to deal with tons of comics, tons of omnibuses, tons of collectibles, some original art. And he's not in that world. One other thing that I do want to point out as we have this discussion, leave instructions for your funeral. There are people who want a big funeral. If you want a big funeral, etc., let your relatives, your beneficiaries, etc., know. But leave them instructions. I work in benefits, and every company gives their employees life insurance. And I cannot tell you how many times I've had a funeral home call before we've even been notified by the person's workplace or their family. Funeral home calls to ask how much life insurance a person has. Because what they usually do is, let's say you've got $50,000 in life insurance. Well, they know that the family has $50,000 to play with, so they're going to put a package for $48,000 in front of them. And nobody knows the funeral industry very well, except for the people who are in it. I have taken so many of those calls. I sat down with my son and I said, all right, here's what I don't care what you do, but here are ways you can save money. Here are ways that they try to get money out of you. Don't ever let them know how much life insurance I had. Ever, ever, ever. Don't ever let a funeral home know how much life insurance you have. Because if you have $50,000, your funeral will cost $48,000. If you have $100,000, it'll cost $99,000. That's how it works. And there are no regulations on it. So take the time to prep. That's just my advice. One of my online friends, Terry Wood, who's done a bunch of cartooning, is dealing with her partner's passing and not knowing what to do with the stuff, because her partner collected stuff she was not in a world of. It's been a year and I don't know what to do with any of this stuff. And you do not want to leave it for an estate sale, because estate sales are horrible. You make very little money out of it. It's bottom feeders who will try to screw over anybody involved because they're experts. Even the people who run the sales aren't. And they're going to come in.
The deal with estate sales is they're trying to empty the place.
Yeah.
That's why if you really want to make a deal, say they're doing a estate sale Friday, Saturday, Sunday, anything goes.
Yeah.
They're just trying to blow it out. And the sad estate sales are the ones where somebody died and there's no one. You know, daughter's out of town. We're just told they come in, they price everything, and they just try to get rid of it. So, and again, like Cory said, it's a great place for bottom feeders, a good place to go look for stuff. But, you know, in my case, with all my comics, I already know my kids don't want them. My wife has nowhere to do with it. I told her, you know, talk to Pat Gruber, talk to you, Cory, assuming you're around. That's why I eBay everything. I figure, let's blow it out. You know, Cory's got a vastly different idea what he wants to do. Speaking of Pat Gruber, he's moving his stuff. He got rid of pretty much all his comics, all his graphic novels that he doesn't want, that he doesn't want to reread, even to the point where he doesn't have runs. You know, I like this run. I don't like these issues, but I like these. You know, he's doing the same with his original art. And that's a lot trickier because he's got pieces that sell in, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. So, yeah, have it all planned out. There are, as Cory mentioned, there's 3 people who passed away. The first one I want to mention, and again, I've never met either of them, Ratafia McLeod. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, because you know me and my names. She is the wife of Scott McCloud, who we've talked in the past, Zot, Understanding Comics, Reinventing Comics, Making Comics, The Sculptor, the last of which I've never read, so I'll read it. She, and I'm taking this right off Mark Avanier's column, News from Me, and he says, this is a part I hate to type and you'll hate to read. She died in a car crash in Michigan. According to the Facebook post, she was on her way to see the younger of her 2 daughters graduate with a master's degree. Ivy was just one of those people who was just filled with joy and friendliness and complete support of anyone, and not just for her husband, who made the comic art community a better, happier place. She had a great laugh, gave award-winning hugs, and was just a beautiful human being. Our sympathy and deepest condolences go out to Scott McCloud's family, friends. You feel bad for someone you've never met, both Scott and Ivy. And the circumstances that she died just makes me want to cry. And further emphasizes what Cory said. You don't know when you're going to go. So go out, give your friend a hug today. Or in the case of Cory, just leave a pie on the doorstep and back away. Cory doesn't like hugs. On a more personal note, a friend of ours passed away, Pat McDonough. On April 21st, he passed away. Patrick John McDonough, or Mac, as I'm going to call him, as many as knew him, passed away at age 66. He was one of the, I don't think he was a founding member of the MCBA.
No, he came in
when Nick came in.
No, he came in a little before Nick.
Well,
he came in about 94, 95, because he was volunteering while I was still in charge. Nick came in when I stepped down.
Okay. And that was just a coincidence. It wasn't that Nick and Cory don't like each other. It's just
no, it was happened. I stepped down and everybody was like, well, who's going to run this thing? And Nick went, I'll take over.
Yeah. Pat was encouraging the creators, volunteers alike. He was a friend. He was very supportive of the shows and community. And I'm going to read what Terrence Creep wrote. And this gives you an idea how Pat is. Years ago, and this is Terrence talking, Mac and I, several others, were hanging out after MCBA convention. He was holding court, telling stories about his checkered young adulthood. When I asked why he did what he did, he answered, I was thinking, that's one for the rocking chair. It's a quote I've cited often since then, even contributing to my decision to become a professional wrestler relatively late in life. And I made it a point of telling him whenever I saw him, if only he had more time in that rocking chair. And again, for Cory, myself, condolences to Mel, the fish killer, his fiance, and the rest of the McDonough family and friends. Now, Pat, I don't recall. I think I met him because he was one of the original guys who started shopping at my comic store. And I just loved it when he came in. It's always fun to talk because it was always funny because he would always be like, "Oh, what's good? Well, this is pretty good. This comic here, people seem to enjoy it." And he kind of looked at it and said, "Well, and this one's pretty good." And it's like no matter what I would pick, he kind of looked at it and made a judgment, put it back, and I said, "Well, you can try this one. Was it any good?" I said, "No, it's utter crap, but you're putting back everything else that I picked for you." He was very much into Joe Michael Linsner's art. As far as I know, he at one time had everything Joe ever published to that time. And that includes even the infamous Cry for Dawn counterfeit, which Nick found for him. Because a lot of people don't want to deal with it. It's kind of, along with the Cerebus counterfeit and a few of the Turtles, one of those aberrations of comic history. You can't even get it graded because they don't want to touch it. They want to encourage people. But Nick was able to find it. But I was actually able to give Pat a comic that surprised even him. And it was Tears of Dawn #1. And this comic apparently was very elusive to him for some reason. I remember getting it because I went into Cap City and screwed up Gruber and mine one of our early orders. And I think Mark was real cautious of this because somebody up the higher chain must have said, "Okay, listen, these guys are taking over Hot Comics. Hot Comics opened another sale. Don't mess this up." Because he was super apologetic. He gave us this big grab bag full of stuff, and inside was a Tears of Dawn. And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. I like Linsner." And then years later, when I knew Pat was buying, I said, "Hey, I found something for you." He said, "Oh my God, where did you find this?" I said, "I don't know. It's just in my pile of stuff. It's so hard to find." I cut him a deal on it, and he was very, very happy with it. I know eventually Pat sold the entire collection. He did offer it to me, but and Pat was a very, very generous guy, almost to the point where I felt bad because he was my friend. And what he would do is he'd come in, he'd buy all his comics. The following week, he'd give them back to me and buy a new set. And this drove me crazy because I was like, "Hey, if you're my friend and you want to read this, go ahead and read it. I feel bad taking the money from you." But he was like, no, don't worry about it. It's what I want to do. And I understand that now because it's something I do, especially when I go to comic shops and other stores. I want to survive. I will drop $100 in your shop. I may not be buying things that I need, but I'm doing it because I want to support you. And that was something that Pat did for Gruber and I when we first started Hot Comics and later on when I had Crazy Comics. So very generous. I do recall one con story, and I think this was a turning point for the con, because I know, Cory, you always talked about it in the beginning, and I was there for a while. The con guys were almost scared of the retailers. I mean, you guys would bend over backwards if they had a complaint or something was wrong, or, "Oh, I didn't do well this show," and blah, blah, blah. Well, when Pat finally got into the financial part of it, where like you send him the checks, there would be guys who would come up to him and try to pull the same thing. "Oh, man, I don't like this location." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." He pulled out the checkbook. Here's a refund for your tables." "Well, no, I don't want to go." I said, "Well, you're not happy. Get your money back and you can go." So he kind of put a tamper on that type of runaway thing where retailers would almost take advantage of the MCBA just because they were so panicky about, losing a retailer or losing their support or something. So I kudos to Pat McDonough. Do you have any specific Mac memories?
That's the first one I remember. The second one is he did something that caused Butch to stay away from the shop for months.
Uh-oh.
Mac was, he never quite said what his job was, but he was one of the higher ups at 3M and was paid exceedingly well, but he had stroke. And one time, Mary and Butch were in the shop, and Mary said something about Butch looking for work. And Mac said, "Oh, I could get you on at 3M in a heartbeat. And we didn't see Butch for like 2 or 3 months after that.
Oh.
But Mac was not just generous with money and stuff. He was generous with time and thoughts. You know, if anybody asked him for help on things, you know, they were having trouble at their job or they were having trouble at home, he would go, well, here's what I would do. And he was very much a no nonsense, lay it on the table, if you don't like it, tough shit sort of person. And I often heard him giving advice to people because he was a bit older than the rest of us, was an executive. And I believe he retired while you still had the original shop, because 3M had such a generous retirement. He just retired and was going to do whatever he wanted to do. And I always envied that. I always envied that ability to just tell people, take it or leave it, not worry about what other people thought or what other people. He didn't need anything from anybody. So he had the ability to just say, well, tough crap. A lot of us will take crap at our jobs and our personal lives, from businesses, etc., because they have something we need. Pat didn't need anything. Financially, he was well off enough that he was beholden to no one. He loved comics, he loved art, but he was never attached to it. He would appreciate it while he had it, like the Linzer stuff. He loved it while he had it, and then he would let it go. Well, I'm done with this now. Someone else can enjoy it. And that, it was always very liberating to think about that. And the fact that he came in when he did and helped move the con from, you described it best. It's not that we were scared of the retailers, but we knew we needed them, because the retailers were the ones who bought the tables that gave us the money to bring in the guests and rent the hotel. And he, knowing finances far better than any of the rest of us, set up the convention so that, one, we didn't need to do that anymore. And two, because he had that in his head, we got retailers from outside the Twin Cities, because he knew, he knew Harley Yee. He knew Mile High Comics. He knew all these people. So if one of the local comic shops, like Twin Cities Comics, started giving us trouble, he didn't worry about it, because he could always call Jamie Graham down at Graham Crackers and go, hey, we got 2 extra tables. You want them? Or he could call Harley Yee and go, yeah, somebody doesn't like this setup. Would you rather have their prime spot? We'll dump them for you. And that's something that conventions, you have to build to a certain point to get to. And I think he was very instrumental in that. Mac was always fun to talk to, in that he just, that there's a book out called The Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And he was the first person I ever met who had that down. You could tell that, he didn't care if you liked him or not. He would be friends with you. He'd be friendly. There were a couple times I met him at concerts. He was at a Cheap Trick concert at First Avenue I went to. Oh, it was a lot of fun hanging with him and a couple of his friends. And, just a guy who got to enjoy life. And it's a really good blueprint for how to enjoy your life. Quit worrying about whatever anybody else thinks of you. Just live your life and enjoy it. And now we're starting a new segment that I'm going to be doing every so often, and that is Crash Course. Friday morning, I woke up and saw on my Facebook, there are very few times when you look on Facebook and everybody's posting about the same thing. Friday morning, everybody was posting about the same thing. Neal Adams, comic artist, owned a comic studio, massive fighter for creators' rights, passed away Friday morning at the age of 80. It was complications from sepsis. And what sepsis is an infection that has moved from wherever you were initially infected to the rest of your body. So it's like if you, I always heard it where it's an infection that has taken over and your body is spending all its time fighting it rather than anything else. This is the second time he had a bout of sepsis. The first time, I guess he was very sick for quite a long time, lost 40 pounds. His family didn't announce that he was in the hospital or anything until he passed. Neal Adams was born in 1941, and he has been a part of comics as long as I have been alive. And Joe, if you'd like, I can give kind of an overarching view of his life before we go into detail.
Sure. And of course, at this point, we always like to stop and find out, does the Strode know? What is Neal Adams' first published comic book work?
It was in a comic called Adventures of the Fly. Remember last week when we talked about how Archie restarted their superheroes? Well, they had restarted their superheroes about 1959. Joe Simon had Jack Kirby draw some stuff before Kirby was committed to Marvel and had a contract with them. But there was one panel Kirby had not drawn the character changing into his costume.
I actually found
and Neal Adams
a 2000 interview
panel. 2018 was when he talked about it on the Comic Book Historians podcast.
I've got his quote, and the reason I'm butting in because I just want to read it because this is in Neal's own words. I started to do samples for Archie, and I left my fly samples there. A couple of weeks later, when I came in to show my Archie samples, I noticed that the pages were still there, but the bottom panel was cut off one of my pages. I said, what happened? They said, one of the artists did this transition where Tommy Troy turns into the Fly, and it's not very good. You did this real nice, so we'll use that if it's okay. I said, that's great. That's terrific. And that was his first. I don't know the page. I've seen it because it's flying around Facebook. Let's see. So you have a choice. It could have been Ted Galindo, Saul Brodsky, or Bob Powell on Adventures of the Fly #4. So if you're going crazy and you want to fly, get it, and find Adventures of the Fly #4, you can find like 2.0s for about $300, a 4 or a 5.0 for $675, or a signed 3.0 for a mere $1,000. So, and again, you look around, you'll see other ones, but those are the three that are on the eBays as we are recording this here podcast.
Neal went to the School of Industrial Art. It was also called as the High School of Art and Design. It was created to be a vocational high school to teach people how to draw and have a career in art. Other comic artists you may have heard of who went there were Al Plastino from Superman, Chick Stone, who inked at Marvel forever and ever, Carmine Infantino, Alex Toth, John Romita, Ralph Bashki. Neal Adams went there in 1959. Soon after, he was looking for work, wanted to work at DC. Wanted to work at DC in the worst way, was bringing them samples all the time. And DC was kind of a fiefdom at the time. Each editor controlled their group of books and had their talent. And it was really rare for anybody to break in because that was a closed shop at the time. He went to Archie, was trying to get in at Archie. And at Archie, he was recommended to work for Howard Nostrand, who was drawing a Bat Masterson newspaper strip. So Adams got hired as an assistant. He worked on Bat Masterson. He then got on at an advertising firm where he created advertisement comics for corporate clients such as General Electric and Bell Phone. He got brought on to the Ben Casey comic strip and actually had his name on it. Ben Casey had been a movie series and then a TV series. He was also the ghost artist for other comic strips such as The Heart of Juliet Jones and Peter Scratch. And one of the things that I find really interesting, if you look at artists from the 40s and 50s, most comic book artists wanted to get into newspaper strips. Walt Kelly, soon as he could get into newspaper strips, did so. Same for Crockett Johnson. A number of people, if they got a comic strip, they wanted that. It was more prestigious, it paid better, and the more newspapers you were in, the higher your pay was. So Neal Adams broke in through comic strips and then moved to comic books. In 1966, as sales were starting to drop right before the Batman TV show, Carmine Infantino was put in charge of editorial. Neal Adams had sold a few stories to Archie Goodman over at Warren, so he had a portfolio of published work. And with Carmine Infantino taking over, he wanted things that were more visual. He thought that the problem with DC and why the sales were down was because that the comics were very literary. The art was boring, and it was all tons and tons of text. He wanted to bring in newer artists. And one of the things he did, he had started a series called Dead Man in Strange Adventures. He turned the art over to Neal Adams, and Neal Adams went nuts. If you have read those Dead Man stories, it doesn't take long before he's doing strange design with pages, breaking apart panel structure. But the thing about Neal Adams is his figure work. One of the best descriptions I ever heard of Neal Adams's art is Neal Adams draws people who looked as if they were drawn that way. His anatomy was more realistic, more film and TV based. When you look at his figures look more real, whereas other people's figures look very posed and very stiff because they came from a traditional art style. And he shook things up. He was put on stuff like this, was put on books like The Spirit. Now, the thing was, his books didn't sell really well according to the old practices. However, Bob Bierbaum, who is writing a book called The Comic Store Wars and has worked in comics retail since the early 70s, has information that one of the things that hurt DC and other companies was, as these comics would go to distributors, there were collectors who had worked their way in with the distributors and would just, I want a bundle of that and a bundle of that and a bundle of that. And sometimes the distributors, who weren't always on the up and up, would just say, they had sold 4 bundles of Green Lantern, Green Arrow. But they would mark it as, they were returned and destroyed, so that they got paid on both ends. If you're a Marvel fan, you probably remember the whole hubbub about Howard the Duck back in 1976. Oh, it's sold out and you can't get it anywhere, et cetera, et cetera. However, for Marvel, it didn't sell well. Why? Because the early comic dealers came in, bought them all up at the distributor level. There were tons of cities where Howard the Duck never even got distributed because early comic shops had come in, bought them all from the distributors. And the distributors had marked them. They didn't sell.
And you remember the comic that everybody thought would sell better, and they went heavier on.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what happened with Shazam.
Yeah.
It was another one where the collectors went to the distributor and bought the bundles, and it didn't get onto the newsstands, and they marked it to DC. Oh, yeah, we had this many returns.
I just remember my old comic shop guy, John Nunziata, he was, who would have thought? We all bet heavy on Spider-Woman #1, and Howard the Duck went up in price.
So Neal Adams was drawing at DC. His books didn't sell that great. Dead Man got canceled. Spectre got canceled. Green Lantern, Green Arrow got canceled. But also, if he put a cover on a book, it sold. If you look at DC covers from the 60s, the late 60s, there are so many Neal Adams covers because a Neal Adams cover would sell. And that was back in the day when the cover is what sold the book. It was also back in the day where DC had a rule where, okay, if we put a gorilla on the cover, it'll sell better. If somebody's crying on the cover, it'll sell better. If somebody is, if somebody's dead on the cover, it sells better. But we don't want to overuse it. So you could only have so many gorilla covers a month. You could only have so many crying covers a month. And somebody said, well, if you got a dead gorilla that somebody's crying about, that'll be the best-selling comic of all time. Add to that, if Neal Adams would have drawn it, would have been the best-selling comic ever. So Neal wasn't being treated well at DC. Let's see. In 1969, Adams, Infantino, and Stan Lee helped found the Academy of Comic Book Arts, which Adams viewed as an organization that could champion creator rights, demand royalties, improve pay, guarantee original art returns. The organization quickly split among those who wanted to focus on creators' working conditions and those who, like Lee and Infantino, would rather it serve as a professional function similar to that of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts, and Sciences. This division was reflected in the administrative offices. The position of president was first occupied by Lee, then by Adams. Rather than support Adams's unionizing goals, Lee and Infantino later departed. Adams' sense of disappointment in the corporate structure at DC and Marvel prompted him to start Continuity Associates with Dick Giorgiano in 1971. And what they did, they packaged comics and magazines with the help of a variety of new and upcoming artists and writers. It was basically a studio that also functioned in packaging stuff, just like back in the 40s when the Simon and Kirby studio would package comics for Marvel and then later for DC, or the Iger Eisner studio, which would package comics for other publishers. Another thing they did is they took a lot of advertising work. And Neal often talked about how he loved to do comics, but if he did a minivan ad for Ford, it would take 2 days and it would pay more than doing an entire comic or DC or Marvel, no matter how well it sold. It was also around this time that he got really, really frustrated with DC, went over to Marvel. And at Marvel, they had him first do the X-Men. And just like Green Lantern, Green Arrow, X-Men was a dying book. They thought, Roy Thomas thought that bringing in Neal Adams would help it a lot. Sales went up, but they went up after, basically they were getting the sales report 6 months behind. So they canceled the X-Men, and then they saw, oh, wow, the sales just shot up like you can't believe, which is why the X-Men was brought back as a bi-monthly reprint book. It was, well, we can't count on these sales being up because Neal has moved on to something else. But obviously people like the X-Men, so we'll just keep it going. He then went over and did a book that probably was one of the first huge comic events. And when I started reading comics in the mid-70s, it was still being talked about. And that is the Kree-Skrull War in the Avengers. And Roy Thomas basically picked up threads from the Inhumans book that he and Neal Adams had done. They did Amazing Adventures was half Black Widow, half Inhumans. It didn't sell well enough because split books weren't selling anymore. But they were building up this big story about the Kree and the Inhumans, and Roy Thomas brought that story over into the Avengers. And it was probably the first mega story in a lot of ways. It was a long, for the time, like 8 or 9 part story. It's been reprinted over and over. Can't tell you how many times people have swiped poses and art from those issues, either as a homage or because they were lazy and just wanted to swipe Neal Adams's art. But it was one of those books that, to a Marvel fan, it was a big event, a lot like the Galactus trilogy. And then Neal kind of moved more into advertising and doing private commissions. And fighting for creators' rights. One of the things that was big for Neal Adams was he wanted his original art back. And the way he got the publishers to give it back was that there were artists in California. And he went to a lawyer and dug into things and then went to DC and said, all right, here's the thing. You're buying the reproductive right. You're buying the right to reproduce. You're not buying the actual art, because if you buy the actual art, you have to pay tax on it. And you've never paid tax on any of this. And the lawyers at DC freaked out. So they created a way to return the original art. That went over to Marvel. That's how creators got their original art back. Then, as the hype for the first Superman movie starts up in 1976, the creators of Superman, Siegel and Schuster, both of whom had been fired from DC previously. They weren't working in comics anymore. Neal basically said, you're going to give these guys a pension, or I'm going to create a stink about things. And DC hemmed and hawed, and Neal Adams used his contacts in the advertising world and in the media world. And there started to be stories in newspapers and TV news about how this multi-million-dollar Superman movie is about to start, but the creators of the character live in poverty. DC was basically shamed by him into giving them a pension. It wasn't a whole lot of money. Then when Paul Levitz came in, Paul Levitz made sure that there were cost of living increases to the point where by the 80s, they were making a really good living off what they had created. And it literally were pennies on DC's dollar. Neal Adams fought for creators' rights on everything. I can't tell you how many stories I've read. If you go to Facebook and you follow artists, they all who met Neal Adams will tell stories about how you bring your portfolio to him. He's going to tear you apart. But if you liked your stuff, he would call people at Marvel and DC and say, hey, I'm sending this kid over. You need to give him a job. One of those people, Frank Miller. A lot of artists got their start at Continuity Studios, including Walt Simonson, Howard Chaykin, Larry Hama. Well, Larry Hama kind of got his start with Wallywood, but he worked at Continuity as well. Tons of people went through Continuity. And Joe, were you ever at a convention where Neal Adams was?
I don't believe I ever had been, or if I was blissfully unaware of it.
One of the things that Neal Adams did was he charged for autographs. And he was one of the first artists at conventions to charge for sketches. Nobody charged for sketches in the 60s. And when Neal Adams started, it's like, well, I'm here, I'm working, you should pay me for this work. And what he would tell artists was that they needed to charge for their work. And Larry Hama told this great story about how, he didn't know what to charge for his sketches. And Neal Adams said, charge $20. $20 is the coin of the land. Why? Why $20? Because when you go to an ATM machine, they give out 20s. They don't give out 10s. They don't give out 50s. They give 20s. So if somebody wants your stuff, they could go to the ATM. They get a 20. You don't have to give them any change. It's easier for them. And there was one convention where there was an artist, and if I remember who it is later, I'll let people know. But he had set up a thing where he was charging $20 for sketches, and Neal Adams came by. And this was like within the last 10 years or so. Neal Adams came by and said, "Are you selling many sketches?" And the artist said, "No." And Neal said, "You charge 40. But I'm not selling them for 20. Yeah, $20 now in today's economy and everything, $20 is nothing. They charge 40. You're worth more." And he took the artist out to lunch, talked with him while they were at lunch and everything. And while they were gone, Neal Adams's people made a new sign for him that he was charging $40 per sketch. And when he came back, the new sign was there, and he started selling sketches. Neal Adams was very big on creators' rights, knowing what you're worth, and letting people know that what you do costs money. Pat Gruber has bought art from him, and I bet Pat Gruber paid through the nose for that art.
Oh yeah. He's always. I've been bad again, because I think the last time Neal was here was one of the Wizard World shows.
Now, what was the piece that Pat had?
I'd have to ask him, because I don't know if he kept it or not.
But
I'll put that on the to-do list.
Neal Adams worked in creators' rights all through his life because he was part of a new generation. There were the artists from the 40s and 50s who went through the collapse of the comic book industry and very much were, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky to still have a job. Kirby was very much like that. You know, he talked about how he had to go hat in hand over to Stan Lee. He didn't want to work at Timely, even though Timely turned to Atlas. He didn't want to work for Timely because he had such a bad experience with Captain America, but he couldn't get work for DC. Dell was on the West, well, Gold Key was on the West Coast. It was basically Marvel or Carlton at that time. Or, you know, he did some stuff for Archie, but they weren't buying a lot of work. Stan could give him all the work he could get. Neal came in. He was young. He was in his 20s. There weren't a lot of young people working in comics at the time. He was kind of the vanguard of the people who'd grown up on comics, who wanted to work in comics because they loved comics, not because, okay, it's a job where I can draw all day. And he also knew his worth in that if you're not going to pay me what I deserve, I'm going to walk. If you're not going to give me my original art, I'm going to leave. If you're not going to treat me well, I'm out of here. He had his own continuity. Package comics in the 80s. They had a brief run that we talked about a couple of weeks ago with publishing their own stuff in the 90s. He did some recent stuff. He did a Fantastic Four story with Mark Waid, and Mark Waid recently posted that it's kind of humbling to him that he's the last comic writer that Neal Adams ever worked with. Neal did stuff that he wrote himself, but I loved his story I love Mark Waid's story about working with Neal Adams. He said, all right, there are three things I want. I want a big page with Galactus, because I could sell that for a lot of money. So when you write this, make sure to write me a big Galactus page. I want a big page with the Silver Surfer, because I could get a lot of money for that. And I want the story to have a happy ending. I don't want it to have a downer ending. All of my comics, I want to end on an up note, because there's enough sadness and depression in the world. I don't want people to read a comic and have it be a downer for them. Now, the stuff that he drew and wrote himself, I've made jokes about it in the past. Boy, it's pretty, but it makes no goddamn sense at all. There's also Neal Adams.
How dare you badmouth Skate Man?
Well, I'm thinking more the Ra's al Ghul story he did at DC. That, for the life of me, I don't know what happened in that story. Been on, what is it, Coast to AM, one of those late night conspiracy theory shows. He'd been on that a lot, talking about his expanding Earth theory, that the Earth is hollow and it's expanding. He was working on a 200-page graphic novel about it. There were times Neal rubbed people the wrong way because he was very strong and opinionated. There are some artists who actually said, I don't want to talk about my dealings with Neal. I'll just talk about how much I loved his art. He got on his bad side. Yeah, he was kind of relentless. But a lot of people are like that.
I gotta say, I never had a real appreciation for Neal Adams, because when I started, and again, I started later than you, so all of his groundbreaking stuff had already been done. But as time went on, like with most artists, like Kirby did go, certainly guys like Don Rosa, I always noticed there were certain comics that I read that stuck with me a little bit more than other ones. And then as DC and Marvel would start reprinting things, I think the first one I recall is the Baxter series format Green Arrow,
Yes.
Green Lantern, which allowed me to read it. I think Marvel did X-Men Classics, where they did that. So I was able to pick up on stuff like that. And then as I got older, I picked up the Strange Adventures slipcase hardcover. I picked up the Neal Adams archives. And even as we've done this podcast, whenever he did anything, and I think he did it was supposed to be a 4-issue miniseries called The Criminal. And one issue came out, nothing else was ever done. The rest was canceled. But when we saw his name, we got genuinely excited. So I got more appreciative of Neal Adams as I got more, mature, learned more about comics, got access to these comics. Because before the reprints, yeah, I knew the Kree Skrull War was hot. I knew Neal Adams did it. But until they did the Baxter Kree Skrull War reprint, I didn't have access to it. You kids nowadays, you have graphic novels, you have omnibuses, you have digital. But yeah, for me, if I wanted it, I had to go spend to get it. And fortunately, though, I was able to find it. And hopefully you can as well, because he's done so much and so groundbreaking. And like you said way earlier, and I didn't want to butt in because you had a good head of steam going, but damn, those covers are beautiful. Even if the comic itself, or subpar or whatever, those covers are just, I can picture right now the Batman or the Treasury edition where Batman's over Robin.
Oh yeah, that reprinted the Ra's al Ghul story.
Yeah, and even the Batman cover I was thinking of is where Batman's on his back with a knife in him, and Ra's al Ghul's just kind of like,
oh yeah,
this is a
where
big
it looks
fight.
like Batman's been stabbed, but the sword is like right on his side.
Yeah.
3 more things I want to point out about Neal Adams before we wrap up. First, after the Batman TV show, all superhero comic sales dropped, but Batman sales dropped precipitously. And we've talked before, Detective Comics was in trouble, and Batman was almost canceled before the TV show because sales had collapsed. They brought in Neal Adams. Denny O'Neil and Neal Adams took over Batman after Green Lantern, Green Arrow had failed. And they completely revamped the character. They went back to the roots, and actually, in my opinion, went beyond that in making Batman the creature of the night. And the other thing they did, and it's weird in that people don't really see this, and it's not the way the character is now, but in a lot of ways, Batman under Neal Adams and Denny O'Neil became kind of a superhero James Bond. He no longer lived in the mansion. He lived in the Wayne Tower. He would jet all over the world. He was fighting things like Ra's al Ghul. And Grant Morrison talked about, I want the hairy-chested James Bond Batman. And when you read those Neal Adams stories, can't tell you how many times Batman doesn't have his shirt. Much like James Bond was always losing his shirt as well. And things happened at night. And it wasn't supervillains. It was, creepy things. They didn't bring back the supervillains until later. And when they did, Neal Adams had kind of revamped the villain and made them a threat. The Joker, nobody gave a shit about the Joker for years before Neal Adams brought back in what I think it's called the five-way something. But he made the Joker a killer again. And then Steve Englehart picked up on that and did The Laughing Fish. And with those 2 stories, Joker became scary again. Second thing about Neal Adams I want to point out is there are people who complained that he would redraw and recolor his old stuff when it would be reprinted in hardcover books. And Neal Adams said it this way: there were times when my work was inked very poorly. I won't mention Vince Colletta, but you could certainly know that Vince Colletta did some of the stuff that he redrew. And since this is going in a book, it's going to be permanent. And I don't want that terrible inking job and that terrible coloring job to be saved for all eternity. One of the things Neal Adams did, he changed coloring at DC. DC would color things. I don't want to get too technical about it, but DC had a way of coloring things. And Neal Adams said, well, you have other gradations. You can get other colors by using different percentages. And DC was like, no, we can't. No, we can't. So he colored an issue, sent it to the printer. It came back as Neal Adams had told them it could be done. And DC was like, holy crap, and got all their colors to do it that way. So he never redrew, but he would re-ink. He would do corrections, and he would recolor stuff on the works that he felt when they were printed just looked like crap. Because this is permanent now, I want my work to look its best. And then the last thing that I want to bring up is I have my own first time reading Neal Adams. 1976, 2 days before Christmas, I ran down a flight of stairs. Remember that Star Trek gun that shot the little discs, Joe?
Oh, yeah.
My uncle was chasing me with one. I ran down the stairs to escape, tripped, fell down the stairs face first. There was a door at the bottom of the steps, so all my mother heard at my grandmother's house was thum, thum, boom, 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 bam, as I slam into the door. They opened the door, and I just fall down. And they were like, don't move. You may have broken your neck. We were in the middle of nowhere, so they called an ambulance. I had to wait there, kind of basically in a pile on the floor. I couldn't move because my mother was scared I'd broke my neck for 20 minutes till the ambulance got there. So over Christmas break, I was in the hospital. I'd broken my jaw. They had to wire my jaw shut. And my uncle brought me a big old stack of comics. Basically what he had done, he went to the newsstand in Macomb and bought every Marvel comic they had out of guilt. And let me tell you, that guilt was the greatest thing that ever happened. But one of those books was Giant Size X-Men #2, which reprinted the Roy Thomas, Neal Adams Sentinel story. Now, the other stuff, most of it was reprints because Marvel was flooding the market with reprints. So, yep, here's some Kirby. Boy, here's a lot of Don Heck. Oh, my God, is there a lot of Don Heck? Some Gene Colan, some new stuff, a lot of giant size issues because Marvel was doing giant sizes that were no longer new. They were all reprints, like Daredevil, Giant Size Daredevil #1 reprinted the annual. Giant Size Captain America never had an annual, so it reprinted like 3 different Captain America stories. But the Giant Size X-Men #2, I read it. And I read it, and then I read it, and then I read it. And if you've read that Sentinel story, the art is amazing. The story is phenomenal. I was blown away. Oh my God, I need more X-Men. So the next time I went to the grocery store and had some money, I picked up X-Men #100. Now, at the time, Neal Adams' work was just as influential as Kirby's had been. There was a time in the 60s and early 70s, everybody drew like Kirby. Then Neal Adams showed up. Everybody was drawing like Neal Adams. Matter of fact, Rich Buckler drew like Neal Adams so much that Neal Adams probably could have listed him as a dependent on his taxes. But one of the artists who really drew like Neal Adams, Dave Cockrum. So I pick up X-Men 100, and it's like, well, this is almost as good as the Neal Adams stuff. And who are all these jerks who say they're the X-Men when the real X-Men are right there? Didn't know anything about the new X-Men. And I got hooked by X-Men 100, became a huge X-Men fan, all because I wanted more Neal Adams. Little did I know Neal Adams wasn't drawing much anymore. I I was so tempted to buy Superman versus Muhammad Ali, even though at that time I was a Marvel zombie, and there's no way I would buy a DC book. That, and I didn't have the $1.50 for it. But by the time I was in college and could afford comics, they were starting to reprint Neal Adams stuff. And Neal Adams was one of those guys, if you drew it, I bought it. Even Skate Man. Now, one way to protect yourself when you're on the internet is by using our sponsor.
Oh, our sponsor.
NordVPN. Our newest sponsor is NordVPN. Let's be honest, if you're out on the internet, you need a VPN to protect you. There's all sorts of things going on the internet where people can track you. You could accidentally download a keylogger, all sorts of things. NordVPN gives the best security possible. It has a password manager which generates complex passwords, syncs across all your devices, stores your notes and credit card information. It also gives you 10 gigabytes of private cloud storage, secure files that backs up your data automatically. But the main thing it gives you is peace of mind. It gives you peace of mind when you're out on the internet, when you're streaming, when you're playing games, when you're listening to podcasts like this one. It gives you safety anywhere at any time. It protects your online activity. You get full access to all content. And if you use the link go.nordvpn.net sh3ku, it'll take you to where you can get a great deal for a 1-month plan, a 2-year plan, a 1-year plan. They are our newest sponsor. We're happy to have them. And if you would like to sponsor something here at any of the podcasts on the Solitaire Rose Network, you can. Just email me, solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com. Thanks. And I have been doing more podcasts, Joe.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
Now, hopefully you've listened to the Nyla Rose interview that I did. I'm really proud of it. I got an email about that interview, by the way.
Oh, sweet.
So let me whip this out. Here we go. That interview was incredible. Holy shit, you killed it, brother. I hope you don't mind me saying this should be your niche. Interviewing wrestlers about comics is a fairly unique idea, and you really had some great original ideas. But seriously, Nyla, CM Punk, Dante Martin, Ethan Page, Eva Luno, Alex Amberhantes, you have an ability to relax the person being interviewed, and the whole thing came off smooth. Nyla came off as warm and giving. I'm sure she'd vouch for you if you wanted other wrestlers on. But seriously, not just saying this because we're friends, but you really shined in that interview, and that's from Brian Poindexter. Thank you again, Brian. If you've not listened to that interview, I interview wrestler Nyla Rose about her one-shot Bringing Back Thunderbird, which is getting great reviews all over the internet sphere. And I had a lot of fun interviewing her, but I also do these podcasts. The Solitaire Rose Podcast Network is filled with all kinds of audio goodness. First, there's Crazy Comics and Stories. It's been going since 2010. It drops every Monday, and it has me, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard, and Joe Crazy Writer talking comics, shenanigans, and whatever we're freaking and geeking about. Every Monday morning. It's been going since 2010, and it's available at crazycomics.solitairerose.com. Also on that same feed is the Solitaire Rose Podcast, which is me, again, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard, doing interviews, talking about comics history, pretty much talking about whatever I want to talk about. We've also got Solo Joe, where Joe Crazy Writer does a solo podcast, and he hasn't done one in a while, so kick him in the shins to get him started. We also, on that same feed, have Solitaire Rose Series and Review, where we do DVD commentary of older comic book series. That's all at crazycomics.solitairerose.com. I also do a podcast with Wolfie B. Bad at badadvice.solitairerose.com, where we take listener questions and give them bad advice. There's also Novelcast, where I take the novels I've written and turn them into free audiobooks. That's at novels.solitairerose.com. There's also Fantastic Forecast, where myself and Adam Vermillion are going through the entire run of the Fantastic Four, 4 issues at a time. That's fantasticforecast.solitairerose.com. There are always more podcasts at the Solitaire Rose Podcast Network. Be there. Aloha. And now it's time for the thing Joe thinks is most important in the whole world.
Oh, nice warm pretzel with nacho cheese.
No! What's going on the eBays?
No wonder my blood sugar's... Oh, eBays! Well, I discovered something.
Really?
And does the Strode know?
Probably not.
What is the first appearance of Josie, a.k.a. Josie Jones, of Josie and the Pussycats?
Wasn't it a comic called Here's Josie or She's Josie? And it was there was no Josie and the Pussycats. It was just kind of another Archie book.
No, but it was in another Archie book. Archie's Pals and Gals, number 23, 1962. And basically, this is when Dan DeCarlo was trying to sell this character as a syndicated comic strip called Here's Josie, was able to get her first appearance in Archie's Pals and Gals. A new solo series followed in 1963 called She's Josie. And then that went to issue number 16. Then it changed to just Josie. And that stayed that way until issue number 45 in 1976, when they teamed up Josie with the other 2 Pussycats, and she's ever since been known as Josie and the Pussycats. We don't get sued for that one. So you've got, a number of appearances in Archie's Pals and Gals, and then they're basically all sequentially numbered, at least in that volume 1, because Archie's Josie and the Pussycats, let's see, that went all the way through issue number 106 in 1982. Then the second series started all the way forward in 1993, where they kind of remolded her, and there was a feature film coming out, so they resumed the publication with a number 1. Guess how many issues of this were published?
That I do not know.
2. One in 93, one in 94. So obviously, whatever great plans they had, they just didn't do it. And then, of course, the third one was in the new, currently on hold Archie universe, where they did a miniseries, Josie and the Pussycats. And that was a 9-issue series, 2 books collected, lots of variant covers. I remember reading it. I think I talked about it as one of our reviews we did in the past. So if you're looking to collect, other than, that first appearance, which was well over $2,000, and of course, Josie number 1, way back in 63, which is just a tad expensive. And let's see, that first Josie and the Pussycats, it was a mere $300. So yeah, go check it out. I did find some other interesting things, because as they did different changes, her on again, off again boyfriend showed up in Josie 42 in 1969. That was Alan M. And of course, Alexandria, who had wanted to be one of the Pussycats, but was, demanded that they rename the series, the band, Alexander and the Arcbeats. I don't know. Oh, Alexander's Cool Time Cats, and obviously they said no to that. That was in, of course, Josie and the Pussycats number 45. The other thing that I found weird as I was going through this, and yeah, I'm aware there was a manga makeover in 2005, but that wasn't a separate series. That was kind of done in Tales of the Riverdale Digests. And they had appeared in manga form back in the manga Sabrina and the Teenage Witch number 67, 2005. But Alexandria had a cat, Sebastian, that was a reincarnation of an ancestor from the Cabot family who was executed for consorting with witches. So whenever Alexandria held Sebastian in her arms, she could cast spells. She generally used her power to compete with Josie for Alan, and the spells she cast always backfired in some way. And of course, they were ended when somebody nearby snapped their fingers, which happened a lot. So they didn't use that witchy power stuff in the Hanna-Barbera TV show, go figure, and they kind of disappeared in the comics as well. So there you got your quick history of Josie and the Pussycats. I mention it because I found a Josie and the Pussycats, put it on the eBays, and you know what to do. You know where to go to check it out. But I actually thought I would have some fun because, as I mentioned before, Travis, who also sells under Bloyan 36, had the audacity to ask if I wanted to trade for a comic. And I said, no, I will just send it to you. And then he, feeling extreme guilt at taking good advantage of my gentle nature, not only did he hang our podcast flyer in the art studio, because he says, and this I quote, I'll look at it whenever I need to think of a couple of goons. He sent me some comics for the heck of it. And I thought, I haven't looked at the comics.
Wait. I'm not a goon, I'm a goober.
You're also goody two shows and a rat bastard, but that's not what we're talking about. So let's see. He sent me some comics in a bag. Crazy. Here are some comics for you. Codename Ninja has an ad for that comic that rat bastard wrote. Oh, really?
Yep.
Check out the back cover. Oh, cool. He has one of those guides for me so I can find it. Iron Maiden.
Yep. Which I've talked about before.
Yep. So that's actually pretty funny. Anyways, I thought this was so cool because, as you know, I've got oodles of stuff that I'm trying to sell before I die. Just bring it around. And I thought if any eBay listener out there is interested, get a hold of me through all the various ways you can. The easiest way, of course, is just go to eBay under Crazy, pick a thing, and send me a note saying, hey, I'd like to swap some comics. You give me your address, I will send you some stuff that's in my vast accumulation of crap that's just sitting around. No, it's not going to be the first appearance of, what was that guy's name we talked about? El Myrtle. But it may be something fun. And then you just go ahead and send me something fun back. If you're at all interested in just having some fun, because I can't wait. I haven't, like I said, other than the Codename Ninja, I haven't even looked at the comics he sent me, and I'm very excited to. I just thought it was kind of a fun thing to do. So if you're at all interested, or again, you want to see what I'm putting on the eBays, because you know I do that as well. And since I ain't having hernia surgery, I'll have plenty of time to get stuff up. You know where to go. Crazy, Krayz. Come get some.
And now we get to my favorite part of the show.
Oh, where we all take that Adventures of the Fly number 4 and cut out that Neal Adams panel and put it on our wall?
No. It's not where I give all the school kids Andy Capp's hot fries because I get them in my snack boxes I get, and I hate them. Hate them like poison. No, it's Freaking and Geeking. Joe, what are you freaking on?
Well, I've already talked about my health thing, so the only plus I got going is that the hernia doesn't really bother me. Certainly not like my hips did, which were, mind-numbing, suicidal level pain. So, to be continued. Let's see. Can't freak about the weather. It's actually spring has sprung here. Actually went to a plant sale today with my wife, so that was fun. I do want to, this isn't really a complaint against the vendor, but it is just something I'm disappointed with. There's a company online, Geek and Game, and they have variant covers. They also do a number of surprise boxes, and they always talk about, you could get a signed comic, you get a rare variant, we're going to send some CGC comics. And I thought, well, that sounds like fun. Let's send off for one. Well, I got it, and to be blunt, everything I got, I could have gotten off the shelf at the source. I didn't lose money, but I didn't get anything that made me think, oh, wow, this was cool. I want to rant about it. I want to do it again. They didn't promise the world, but, I got caught up in the hype, and I do love getting boxes of stuff. Like I said, I got that stuff from Travis. I'm excited to see. I was kind of disappointed with what I had. I'm not going to complain. I am complaining, but I'm not going to, I want to return it. I got gypped. No, I got my money's worth. I was just disappointed it wasn't as much fun as I had hoped. And, like I said, I don't know what, you're thinking you'd like to, I don't know. Let's think back when I got that metal variant cover from Coffin Comics. I mean, I held on to that thing for half a year. And then, I was so stoked and excited for it. That's the type of thing. Even when I get stuff through Kickstarter and things like that, there's always just fun stuff included. And I just didn't get that thrill with this. Again, not Geek and Games' fault. Maybe I was expecting too much. I don't know. But I was kind of bummed about that. So the most important thing, how do you say it in Latin? Caveat emporium?
Caveat emptor.
Emptor, yep. So that's pretty much it for freaking. Cory, what you freaking on?
When I was a youngster, mostly my teenage years and then into my 20s and early 30s, I used to get terrible, terrible migraines. They were debilitating. They were painful. I have friends who had migraines who said, and I had to go to the ER. For us, the ER was 20 miles away, and my mother had migraines, not as bad as me, but they were like, okay, we'll just get you to the doctor. We'll get you medication once it's resolved, rather than take me to the ER. And the way my migraines were, I would get that halo effect, which means there would be a part of my vision that would get very blurry and then almost tingly in a way, in that rather than being able to see, it would just be this halo of shifting colors. And what I've learned from all the research for years is that's the blood vessel pressing against your optic nerve, because when you get a migraine, it's basically the blood vessel it dilates. Basically, it swells up, and then the pain comes when it starts dilating, which means it big, small, big, small, big, small, big, small, big, small. And it felt like there was something behind my eye trying to push its way out. And they would be so bad that I would take codeine, have to lay down in a room. Any light would cause great pain. Any sound would cause great pain. There was a point where we were on vacation in Wyoming at Yellowstone, and I got a migraine, and we basically had to put me in the car, roll down on the windows, and put a tarp over the car. Everybody in the family went off for Yellowstone. I took medication and was just passed out. And they were really horrific until about my mid-30s, when we realized that part of it was stress and part of it was diet. Any sort of soft, runny cheese, like cottage cheese or ricotta cheese, I'll have a migraine within 2 hours. So it's a weird kind of food allergy. And for the longest time, I really haven't had a problem with them. I've, had one every 2 or 3 months. But lately, I've been getting the halo effect. But thankfully, I found an over-the-counter medication that works really well. It's a mix of Tylenol, aspirin, and caffeine. And what it is, the Tylenol stops the swelling, the aspirin thins the blood, and the caffeine speeds it all up. So that now I just get the halo effect and then a mild headache afterward. But I'm having that more often. And Monday, I had it about a half hour before I was supposed to go to the group home. So I had to call and go, I can't go to the group, can't work tonight. Why? Because I can't see to drive. And it faded a few hours later. So when I go in for my annual checkup, I'm going to let them know that, hey, starting to get migraines again. Comic-wise, there isn't really anything that's bothering me a lot. Marvel and DC seem to be there's nothing big coming up, but nothing small coming up either. Marvel's starting to promote their Avengers Inhumans crossover, which looks to be really cool, but I doubt anybody will care, because who cares about, not Inhumans, I'm sorry, the Eternals. It's going to be basically, it's the Avengers, the X-Men, and the Eternals. And I think it's going to be a lot of who cares? And that kind of shows me that Marvel hasn't really got a good grip on what big stories they want to do. DC's got Dark Crisis coming up. We'll see what comes out of that. And the last thing I am freaking on, the group home, some of the houses, we have had to go back to full PPE because the clients now are going to their day programs. Well, a couple of them have come back with COVID. Now, the good thing is everybody who works there has been vaccinated. Everybody who lives there has been vaccinated. We've all been boosted. If you have not been vaccinated and boosted, you have to work at one of the houses that's a lot harder to work at. I'm not saying that those two things are connected, but those two things are connected. So there are times when I will go in and I have to fully suit up, have to wear the full mask, have to wear the guard, have to wear the gown over my clothes. And as it's starting to get warm, as Joe said, it's not really comfortable. But it's what we do to keep ourselves safe. Joe, what are you geeking on?
Oh, I got all sorts of stuff to geek on. First off, I alluded to, I'm getting the basement organized. My comics, not yet, but we tore out a shower. When my wife and I first moved into this house over 30 plus years ago, it had no shower. And so we had an old-fashioned claw tub, and we would go in with a cup and pour water over myself, and that's how I took care of bathing and whatnot. We've got a portable plastic type shower, and quite against code, hooked it up to a couple spigots that were at the wall. And that we worked as a shower until we were able to find an attachment to our claw tub to make it an actual shower. And since then, it's just been kind of there. You know, it's gotten moldy, gotten oldie, kind of we would store things in it, you know. God knows what kind of wildlife was under it. But we finally got around, after talking about it for 10 years and not using it for probably 15, we got it out. We started a while back, and the first thing I noticed is that I could not get the spigots to turn off because they'd been in the on position for over 30 years. Unfortunately, my daughter's boyfriend came over, and his hands aren't arthritic, so he was able to turn it off. We found out not enough to keep it from leaking, but enough where we could, you know, we just strapped hose to the concrete tub we have, and those who got old-fashioned houses know what I'm talking about. So the water is going into the sink, going into the drain, and we disassembled it all. Early yesterday, we dragged it down to the dump, got rid of the big plastic pieces, and we've been drying it out. No real wildlife disturbed, no big spiders, although a really big centipede, which probably ate all the spiders, and escaped promptly. So he's in the house. I know you're watching somewhere. Just stay away from my comics. So, but it was kind of cool, you know, just getting the house parted, the seas parted. We got the floor where the kids were taken care of. I got a plan to kind of hopefully ungridlock some of the collectibles that I'm keeping versus the ones that I, you know, always eBay and things like that. So that was kind of fun, just to be able to do that and take care of it. In terms of comics and stuff, I just finished watching the last episode of Picard. No spoilers. I enjoyed the living bejesus out of it. I mean, I saw people talking about it online. I was like, please, it just came out less than 12 hours ago as we're recording this podcast. And people are already like, oh, I love it. Oh, shut up. I loved Picard. Oh, it's not Star Trek. Well, yes, it is. It's something that I would do just like in Star Wars. It doesn't have to be about the Skywalkers. In Star Trek, it doesn't have to necessarily be about Starfleet. Although it was kind of, but really more about, you know, if you saw the first season of Picard, how he came back to Starfleet, whatever. A lot of Easter eggs, a lot of shout out. I'm going to go to What Culture as soon as we're done with the podcast, just to watch, you know, here are all the Easter egg shout outs and all that is so cool things that happened in the first episode. If you haven't watched it, watch it. The Moon Knight last episode, I guess, hit, and people are raving about that. I only watched the first episode because I planned to catch up when I had my surgery, but I guess that's not going to happen. Tomorrow, of course, as we record this, the first episode of Obi-Wan, first 2 episodes of Obi-Wan are dropping. A lot of fun watching stuff. I am geeking in the future because a couple of days from as we're recording this, we're going to be doing our free comic book day run. We got a special guest star joining us, which came on the last minute. So 4 people, and we'll see about how it sounds when we're recording. Or maybe we just won't record, or if we record, Cory, just do it secretly. So, because sometimes when we're actually recording, we get into like performance mode, and our conversations aren't as natural as they always were. Plus, we're going to see Doctor Strange. So I imagine next week we'll be talking about that. So as I crawl up my crusty calendar, let's see, we're doing this on the 5th. This will drop, about the 11th or 12th? And you'll hear it on the 18th, so you'll have 2 weeks. And I imagine from what I hear, and I'm trying to avoid, we are not going to avoid spoilers when we talk about Doctor Strange. So you've been warned. Reading, because this is all about reading comics. I actually read quite a few comics. I'll give you kind of mini reviews as we go through them. I found a couple Star Trek annuals back in the Peter David DC era. One of them was Star Trek Special number 1, which was a lot of fun because it kind of, let's see, work this baby open. This took place when, they're wearing their red shirts. It ties into the DC continuity that Peter David had. Savick is there. So it's probably after, how would you say it? Well, okay, it looks, yeah, it's just part of the overall storyline. What I'm getting that was really cool is there was a story at the end written by Michael Collins and drawn by Terry Pallett that dealt with the immediate aftermath of Spock, and right before the Hunt for Whales movie came out, Star Trek 4, where they're on Vulcan and dealing with everything, and a lot of call-outs, a lot of Easter eggs. The other one was that I read, written by Peter David and co-written by George Takei, was again Star Trek Annual 1990. Another fun story, a Sulu story. I thought it was kind of weird because it deals with someone that Sulu fell in love with, a female, and Takei was always like, well, I always played George as if he was gay. Well, you wrote a story where he wasn't. Not that it matters. 23rd century, you can pretty much be what you want. And these were both fun ones. I picked them up probably out of the dollar bins. So other things I picked up, I read Titans, Legion of Superheroes, Universe Ablaze by Dan Jurgens and some cat named Phil
Jimenez.
Jimenez, thank you.
Now, when you posted that, I remember getting that, but it's weird how that had completely gone down the memory hole. It's like, oh my gosh, I forgot that even existed.
Yeah, it's one of those books that, and I'm trying to, here it is, Universe Ablaze. Come on. Hang on a second. Good thing this ain't live, huh? So it's Titans, Legion, not Titans. Titans, I can spell too. Titans, Legion. 4-issue Baxter series. After a devastating battle with the nefarious Brother Blood and his minions in the year 2000, the surviving Titans are placed in suspended animation and revived in the 30th century by the Legion of Superheroes. Once there, they learn of the loss of their loved ones and comrades. And then Troya, who is Wonder Girl, Arsenal, Red Arrow, Flash. Is this? No, it's not Barry. It's Wally. Argent, who we call Aqualad. Tempest, or was that Aqualad? Omen, who I don't know who it was. And Starfire. Again, I wasn't reading Titans. They set out to change the past and save the lives of their fallen friends. It puts them at odds with the laws governing time travel in the Legion's era and sets them up to be pawns of the would-be conqueror and longtime Legion foe, Universal. It's a limited series. It has no bearing on anything because as most time travel happens, and as you heard, you killed off Robin. or Nightwing or whatever his name was. Yeah, that didn't happen, did it? This was back in 2000. Fantastic story. Worth picking up. I don't see that it was ever done in a book form, but there are 4 issues in the back of the series. And of course, Phil Jimenez is, I mean, he was basically kind of lauded like George Perez has been. And I guess Dan Jurgens did the layout. Phil did the finishing art. Fantastic series. Go look for it. Not terribly expensive. Another mini series I read of newer stock. Garth Ennis, Gordon Sudzuza, Miroslav Merva, Marjorie Finnegan, Temporal Criminals from AWA Upshot. I got all 8 issues, including apparently number 3 was a not safe for work issue, which was bagged. But the funny thing was the not safe for work slip was put on the back cover, not on the front cover. So good thinking there, AWA. This was a lot of fun. Again, time travel. Love time travel. Doing what Cory and I would probably do if we were time travel. We'd go around and we'd nick stuff. The only difference between Marjorie is she doesn't just nick things, but she also creates trouble as well. Steals Cadillac that JFK got shot in. I'm not quite sure if he'd been shot or not. Goes back in time and starts changing things just for giggles. And of course, who's the one to stop her? Her little sister, who apparently has been persecuted by Marjorie all her life. So just a fun Garth Ennis book. I got all 8 issues. It's in trade paperback, definitely worth picking up. Another book I had never read before. I thought I read all the Batman Judge Dredd, but I found 2 more. The last in the sequence, Die Laughing. Alan Grant, John Wagner, Glenn Fabry. Somehow the Joker ends up getting into the future. And what does he do? Well, he releases what are they? The Dark Judges? Death, famine. Judge had a hell of a time putting up with these guys. So Batman naturally follows him because apparently in one of the other 2 crossovers, there was Anderson talked about there was a prophecy that Batman will come to Dredd's universe to help save whatever. 2-issue series, kind of pricey, but it was fun reading because again, the last of the crossovers I never read. I revisited in trade paperback form. I told you I read a lot. Mike Grell's The Green Arrow Longbow Hunters. And it's just as crazy as it was then. Mike took Ollie and gave him kind of a later on life crisis. And he was back. It didn't, disappear. I mean, he talks about, I can't believe I shot trick arrows. And Ollie's obviously feeling it that he did kill somebody in pre-52 continuity. But this is when Green Arrow became more of an urban hunter. Wasn't really using trick arrows. And of course, it has the infamous scene, spoilers for those of you who never read it or waiting for the omnibus, where Diana was captured, tortured, and he finds her hanging. And obviously, this was a Baxter book, but they weren't going total non-shock because she was hanging. And of course, the bloodied body was, naked body was surreptitiously covered by her shirt, which happened to cover everything. Nowadays, it probably wouldn't have bothered. Actually, nowadays, DC probably would have published this. But it was the beginning of the series that he did. And of course, this was all done in glorious McCloud art. And although I read it and I know I was waiting for that part, I don't recall any of this series. So it just goes to show maybe I shouldn't throw everything away. The last thing I read was something I picked up, Aftershock, Shoplifters Will Be Liquidated by Patrick Kildon, Stefano Semyon. If you're going to, we always talk about beg, borrow, or ignore, borrow this one. Because I read it, it caught me in places, it didn't catch me in places, it ended up with a, huh. And it was just, I don't regret buying it, but yeah, it's going on the eBays. I read it, and you might like it. But again, see if you can borrow it. I found these copies dirt cheap, and you should be able to find them in, of course, a graphic novel. Now, one book I bought, and I'm going to talk about some other eBay stuffs I bought, was one called Vermilion Number Zero by Behemoth. And the only reason I bought this is because it's going for really silly money on the eBays, and people seem to be really excited about it. And I bought it and I read it. Sex, supernatural. It's black and white with red pushed in. An ending I didn't see coming, but then again, I didn't really see what it was. I got the black variant cover. There's also one of a woman in lingerie leaning back, which almost looked a lot like Howard Chaykin had done it. Really, really wonky stuff. So if you're fans of Black Kiss and that type of stuff, you probably want to go either find one of these for sale or do like I did, buy it on eBays. Because I was, it's not bad enough I'm going to go out this Saturday and spend tons of money. I'm buying stuff constantly. And just some of the stuff I bought, I actually backed in and won a copy of Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man number 6, the much applauded first appearance of El Muerto that everybody's going crazy over because he's going to appear played by Bad Bunny in an upcoming Sony movie, probably years away. And the reason I backed in is because I bid what I wanted, and I got outbid, and then apparently people canceled their bid. So I got one. Cory knows, and I've talked about this before, one of the ways I tend to deal with like a creator I like dying, I go out and buy something he's signed. And I bought something that I had previously, but I don't recall if it was signed. I got a copy of Valerie the She-Bat number 1 store variant. This is the one with the white cover that not only Neal Adams signed, but Peter Stone signed. And it's kind of funny because Neal Adams very vibrant and Peter Stone's just kind of looks like it's been rubbed off. So I have Neal Adams in my collection anyways, but I figured that was just something to pick up. Slowly picking up copies of Hot Wheel. Did DC do that one? I gotta take a look at this. I thought Carlton did it, but no, apparently DC did do it. But it's just one of those I've never had, and since I collect Hot Wheels, I figured, yeah, there it is, DC back in the 70s. 6 issues, very hard to find. Well, I got issue 3 and issue 6, so I'm on my way to the other ones. Other than the Vermilion comic, I bought myself one of those Todd McFarlane Peacemaker 7-inch loose toys. So I got the one where his helmet's on. It first came out at Target and disappeared. And I don't need one sealed because I want to open it because I'm a sick guy. I open my toys and place it right up on the counter. So all in all, a fun thing. Not quite sure if I'm getting box day yet. I got email that something's coming in the mail, so hopefully. But that's pretty much it for me. Cory, what you geeking on?
Joe, remember last week when I said that New Japan Pro Wrestling and All Elite Wrestling were going to have a show in Chicago?
Yes.
Tickets went on sale today.
Ooh.
They were sold out in an hour.
I'm telling you.
11,000 seats sold out. They haven't announced a single match. Basically, they just had the promo when they announced it. And on the website, here's the pre-sale code. They sold out with the pre-sale code. Now, there may be more tickets available tomorrow as, they do the reconfiguring and everything, but sold out in an hour. See what happens when you give fans what they like? Huh. I mean, WWE couldn't even sell out WrestleMania with giving away buy one, get one free. AEW, we're going to have a show with New Japan. Who's going to be on it? I don't know yet. Boom.
Boom.
Also, for a nerd week, this is incredible. All right, so we got the last episode of the current season of Picard.
Yay.
Last episode of Moon Knight.
Yay.
First episode of Star Trek Strange New World.
And I'll talk about that too because I'm going to watch that right after we're off the podcast.
Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which sold $41 million worth of tickets pre-sale. So the movie hasn't opened yet. It's made $41 million. Free comic book day. And New Japan, AEW. That's not counting all the other stuff that regularly comes out. This is like it was the Star Wars week, Star Wars day, so Star Wars was all over the place yesterday. So yeah, it's a good week to be a nerd. Comic-wise, I am still reading The Punisher by Garth Ennis. I am now up to the Barracuda storyline, and the Barracuda mini-series, Punisher versus Barracuda, is one of those that got delayed by COVID, still hasn't been resolicited yet. But as I'm reading this, I'd forgotten just how badass Barracuda was. And it's funny because in most of these stories, the Punisher is just, once he figures out who the bad guy is, he puts a plan in place and destroys them. Nope, Barracuda got the jump on him. And Frank's fighting from underneath. The Punisher's fighting from underneath, which we have not seen in a long, long time. Amazing Spider-Man #1, frustrating in that I want to know what happened. I want to know what happened. I want to know what happened in that 6-month gap. And if you're a writer, that's what you want. You want people to go, I need the rest of this story right now.
And what could have been so freaking bad?
Last thing I am geeking on, I read a lot of digital books. And the reason I do digital books is because I have no more room. And, you buy a book, selling it back, if you take it to like Half Price Book and Magazine, they may give you a nickel. But it costs $10.99 and you're going to sell it for $6. Yeah, you're getting a nickel. Or nothing. We have too many of them. We're not even going to buy it. So with digital, I can read it and be done with it. A lot of it you can borrow from the library. When I was in high school, I read The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks because it was the only big fantasy book that came out. Oh, wait, I was in junior high when I read it. It's the only big fantasy book that came out. And I remember reading it. It had paintings all through it by the brothers Hildebrandt. They were beautiful. And the story was such a knockoff of Lord of the Rings that even I, at age 12, was like, yeah, this is kind of a ripoff. Well, what happened was that Terry Brooks wrote another bunch of books, and Sword of Shannara did so well that his publisher came to him and said, can you write more? And he wrote more, and he wrote more, and he wrote more. And there are 28 books in the Shannara series. And I have not read fantasy for a long time. And the last book came out about a year or two ago. So I said, you know what? In between other books, I will start reading The Sword of Shannara, which actually starts in the 1990s in Central Illinois. So I read the first one, which is Running with the Demon. If you did not know it was connected to the Sword of Shannara books, you would think, that, oh, this is an okay, what they call urban fantasy, even though it's not urban. It's fantasy stuff set in the modern era. And it had a lot of ideas. I think it stumbled on the ending. But one of the things that I really like about Terry Brooks's writing is it's almost easier to read than not to read. His stuff is, he's really good at story flow and writing and evoking a mood and setting the stage. And I really enjoyed that, even if the story was kind of Well, I'm reading the second one, which is Night of the Word. It's pared down. It doesn't have the hundreds and thousands and hundreds of subplots. It's very much kind of one plot. It's much shorter, really reads well. And I'm basically in between other books I read, I'm going to keep reading these. So I'm really enjoying it. If you've ever been a fan of Sword of Shannara or you like fantasy, this stuff is okay. It's not dense. It's not hard to read. It's not full of a lot of philosophy. It's pretty much just, okay, here's some fantasy elements. Here's a mystery. And when the mystery's tied up, we move on to the next book. So well-written stuff. I'm excited about going through this series if the writing continues to stay as good. Believe it or not, kids, you've listened to us blather on about funny books for almost 2 hours.
And the weird thing is, we haven't even talked about Microcon Comic Book Show, which will be occurring in a couple days from this podcast. So if you're planning to go, it's May 14th at the Mermaid Entertainment and Events Center, the Atlantis Event Room, which is in Mounds View. $5 to get in, kids under 9 free. We already know the guest lineup: Dan Jurgens, Gordon Purcell, who've already prearranged to get some fun art from, Tom Nigan, Victor Koo, Kevin Wind, Avery Walker, Aaron Grono, Dave Wheeler, Darla Eklund, Jessica Hickman, whom I've gotten artwork from in the past, Ashley Masson, Chandra Ryer. The dealer lineup: Mark Murdo with Gemini Comics, Angel Toro of Old School Toros, Ken Tim with Most Wanted Comics, Greg Hammer, the Hammer Man, Bill Nierson, Tim Schultz from Carnet City Comics. I wonder where we're going this Saturday, Cory. Tim Lone from Comic College, Eric Childs, our friend from Mind's Eye Comics, Oak Leaf Comics, Comic Vikings, and Source Comics and Games. I will be there. I don't think I'll be doing the charity show, so not asking for you to bring anything, although if you do, I'll just throw it in the pile for eventually when the table does come back. But I will be floating around, so say hi if you're coming out. You should be able to spot me. I'll be a very distinguished-looking bald guy, probably with a mask on, because at least at this time, I still think I'm getting a hernia operation. Is that what you wanted to talk about, Cory?
No, I just wanted to say that comic we like the least, we still like better than the comic that you like the most.
Oh,